I recorded the Bigfoot digging in my backyard, but I never believed what this would mean and how my life would change from that point. Now I'm sitting in a cramped apartment in the city, looking out at concrete and streetlights instead of forest and stars, trying to make sense of what happened. My house in Montana is gone, not burned down in a fire or bulldozed by developers, but destroyed in a way that makes no sense to anyone who wasn't there. The insurance company thinks I'm lying about what happened. The police think I vandalized my own property for attention or money. My brother thinks I had some kind of mental breakdown and hallucinated the whole thing. Even my friends from back home look at me differently now, like they're not sure if I'm telling the truth or if I've lost my mind. But I know what I saw. I know what happened out there on those 5 acres backing up to the Montana wilderness. And I know that something in those woods, something massive and intelligent and completely beyond normal human understanding, tried to save me, tried to warn me, fought to protect me even though it had no reason to care whether I lived or died. That knowledge weighs on me every single day. It started 3 weeks ago on a Tuesday night, or technically Wednesday morning since it was well past midnight. I woke up at 3 a.m. to the sound of digging, not the rhythmic sound of a shovel hitting dirt, but something heavier, more primal, more aggressive. It sounded like someone was clawing at the earth with their bare hands, scooping out huge amounts of soil and tossing it aside with force. The sound was coming from my backyard, maybe 50 feet from my bedroom window. I live alone on 5 acres of property backing up to dense forest in rural Montana. My nearest neighbor is 2 miles down a winding dirt road, and the nearest town is 15 miles away. I'd chosen this place specifically for the isolation, for the peace and quiet, for the chance to live surrounded by nature instead of people. For 8 years, it had been perfect. Deer would wander through my yard in the mornings. I'd see elk in the distance during certain seasons. Sometimes I'd spot a black bear ambling through the trees, and I'd watch from a safe distance, respecting its space. It was everything I'd wanted. That night, lying in bed and listening to something dig in my backyard, I felt my first real twinge of fear about living so far from other people. My initial thought was that a bear had gotten into something, maybe digging for grubs or roots near my garden. Black bears do that sometimes, especially in the spring. But something about the sound was off. It was too focused, too purposeful. And there was a rhythm to it that seemed almost deliberate, almost intelligent. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, my hands already starting to shake with adrenaline, and crept to the bedroom window. I moved the curtain aside just enough to peek out, trying not to make any noise that might alert whatever was out there. The moon was nearly full that night, bright enough to cast distinct shadows across my yard. What I saw made my blood run cold and my breath catch in my throat. There was a massive figure hunched over near my garden, at least 8 feet tall when it was bent over like that. Maybe 9 feet if it stood up straight. It was covered in dark fur that looked almost black in the moonlight, and it was digging furiously with its hands, scooping out enormous amounts of dirt and tossing it aside. This wasn't a bear. Bears don't move like that. This thing was using its hands like a person would, with fingers that gripped and pulled and scooped. The muscles in its back and shoulders rippled under its fur as it worked, and I could see the power in every movement. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the phone steady, but I managed to unlock it and open the camera app. I started recording, trying to keep the creature in frame despite my trembling hands and the darkness. The video wouldn't be great quality, I knew that, but I needed some kind of evidence of what I was seeing. Something to prove to myself later that this was real, that I hadn't dreamed it. That's when the creature stopped digging. Just stopped, mid-motion, like it had heard something or sensed something. Then it slowly, deliberately turned its head toward the house, toward my bedroom window, toward me. Even from 50 feet away in the moonlight, I could make out the basic shape of its face. It wasn't quite human, but it wasn't quite ape either. Something in between, something that shouldn't exist. When the sun finally came up around 6 in the morning, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange, I felt brave enough to go outside and look at what had happened. I grabbed my baseball bat, even though I knew it would be useless against whatever I'd seen, and cautiously made my way through the back door. The early morning air was cool and crisp, and everything looked normal in the daylight, almost peaceful. But what I found in my backyard was deeply disturbing. There were 3 massive holes dug throughout my backyard, each one roughly circular and about 3 to 4 feet deep. The dirt wasn't just dug out carelessly, it was piled in neat mounds beside each hole, like whatever made them had been methodical about it. The holes were spaced out across my property, one near the garden, one closer to the house foundation, and one near the tree line. I had no idea what they were for or why they'd been dug in those specific locations. Near the holes, pressed deep into the soft soil of my garden, I found footprints. They were massive, easily 18 inches long, with 5 distinct toes that looked almost human, but were longer, more spread out. The impressions were deep, suggesting whatever made them was incredibly heavy. I actually went back inside to get a tape measure because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. 18.5 inches for the longest print. The width was nearly 7 inches at the widest point. I'd seen bear tracks before, plenty of them living out here, and these were nothing like bear tracks. These were different. These were wrong. I spent that whole day trying to rationalize what I'd seen the night before. Part of my brain kept insisting there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was a really big person in an elaborate costume, though why anyone would be wandering around my property in the middle of the night in a Bigfoot costume made no sense. Maybe I was still half asleep when I looked out of the window and my tired brain had misinterpreted what I was seeing. Maybe it was some kind of optical illusion created by the moonlight and shadows. But no matter how hard I tried to explain it away, I kept coming back to those holes in my backyard. Those were real. The footprints were real. Something had been here, something massive and strong, and it had left undeniable physical evidence of its presence. The second night was the same. 3 in the morning, the sound of digging, that massive dark shape moving around my property. I watched from the window again, but this time I was more focused on details. The creature moved with purpose, like it was looking for something specific. It would dig in one spot for a while, then move to another area and start again. I counted 4 new holes by the time it left before dawn. The third night, same thing. By this point, I was exhausted and terrified. I'd barely slept in 3 days. My dog, a medium-sized mixed breed I've had for 6 years, refused to go outside. She would whine and pull back toward the house anytime I tried to take her out. Animals know things we don't. I should have paid more attention to that. On the 4th night, things changed. I was watching from my bedroom window like I had been, too scared to go outside, but too curious not to look. The creature came back, but this time it wasn't digging. Instead, it was placing small arrangements of twigs and branches around my property. I watched it work for over an hour, carefully positioning these structures near the tree line, around the holes it had dug, and near my house foundation. Each arrangement was different, but they all had this deliberate quality to them, like they meant something. The Bigfoot moved with the kind of focus you see in someone completing an important task. It would place a structure, step back, and look at it, then adjust the position slightly. I had no idea what any of it meant. I spent the next day examining the twig structures. They were made from small branches, bark, and dried grass, woven together in specific patterns. Some were shaped like small teepees. Others were laid flat in X patterns. A few were twisted into spiral shapes. I took photos of all of them, thinking maybe I could research what they meant. But searching online just brought up a bunch of Bigfoot conspiracy theories and nothing concrete. On the 5th night, everything escalated. I was in my bedroom around midnight when I heard different sounds, not just one set of heavy footsteps, but multiple. And the vocalizations were different too. Deep grunting sounds coming from different directions and this rhythmic chest thumping that made the windows rattle. I looked out and felt my stomach drop. There were 3 Bigfoots on my property. I recognized the original one by a distinctive patch of lighter fur on its shoulder that caught the moonlight. It was standing near my house between me and the forest, but approaching from the tree line were 2 others, and these were bigger, more aggressive looking. They were making threatening noises, these deep rumbling sounds that I could feel in my chest even from inside the house. As I watched, they started destroying the twig arrangements the first Bigfoot had placed. They would walk up to one, kick it apart, and move to the next one. The original Bigfoot was making its own vocalizations, but these sounded different, more defensive, more desperate. What happened next was like watching a nature documentary, except it was happening in my backyard. The original Bigfoot moved to position itself directly between my house and the 2 aggressive ones. It stood its ground as they circled around, testing, probing for weakness. I could see the tension in all 3 creatures. The aggressive ones would feint toward the house, and the protective one would lunge forward to block them. They shoved each other, these massive beings pushing and testing dominance. Finally, the aggressive Bigfoots backed off, but they didn't leave. They retreated to the forest edge and just watched. All 3 of them stayed there until dawn, when the aggressive ones finally melted back into the trees. I didn't know what to think. Part of me wanted to call the police, but what would I say? That Bigfoots were fighting over my property? They'd think I was insane. Part of me wanted to just pack up and leave. But this was my home. I'd lived here for 8 years. I wasn't going to be driven out by whatever this was. Over the next week, it became a nightly pattern. The protective Bigfoot would show up first and rebuild the twig markers. It would place them carefully in the same spots where the aggressive ones had destroyed them. And every night, like clockwork, the aggressive Bigfoots would return. They got bolder each time, pushing closer to the house, staying longer. The protective one was always there, always standing guard, but I could see it was wearing down. It moved slower, its posture wasn't as strong. One morning, I found blood on my back porch. Dark blood, not like anything I'd seen from a deer or other animal. It had a different consistency, almost black in the early light. Then they started coming during the day, which terrified me more than anything. Up until that point, they'd only appeared at night when darkness gave them cover. But now the aggressive Bigfoots were showing up in broad daylight, bold as anything, like they didn't care if I saw them or not. I'd be in my kitchen making coffee at 8 in the morning and look out the window to see them circling my property. They'd walk slowly along the tree line, maybe 30 yards into the trees, visible enough that I could make out their massive shapes, but far enough back that they stayed in shadow. They were testing the boundaries, I realized, testing to see how close they could get before the protective Bigfoot showed up. Testing my reactions too, watching to see if I'd come outside or do something to defend my territory. Sometimes they'd step out into the open just for a moment and stare directly at the house, at me. Those moments were the worst, standing there with a cup of coffee in my hand, frozen, while something 8 or 9 feet tall and covered in dark fur stared at me through my own kitchen window. The twig markers were being destroyed faster than the protective Bigfoot could rebuild them. I'd see fresh one in the morning, carefully placed around the property, and by noon they'd be kicked apart and scattered. The aggressive Bigfoots weren't even subtle about it anymore. They'd walk right up to a marker, pause for a moment like they were making sure I was watching, then deliberately destroy it. It felt personal, like they were sending me a message. This is our territory. You don't belong here. Leave. My dog completely stopped eating around this time. She was a good dog, always had a healthy appetite, but now she wouldn't touch her food. She just stayed hidden under my bed, whining constantly. I had to drag her out to go to the bathroom, and she'd cower and shake the whole time we were outside, pulling toward the door, desperate to get back inside where it was safe. Or where it felt safer anyway. I don't think anywhere on that property was truly safe anymore. At night, the sounds got worse. I started hearing scratching on the exterior walls of my house, long and slow. Deliberate scratches, like something was dragging claws down the wooden siding. The sound would start on one side of the house, work its way around, and stop right outside my bedroom window. I'd lie there in bed, lights on, listening to those claws scrape against the wall just inches from my head. I knew what was making the sound, I knew what was on the other side of that wall, but knowing didn't make it any less terrifying. One night, something walked across my roof. It happened around 2 a.m, and the footsteps were so heavy they actually shook the light fixtures. I could track the sounds as they moved from one end of the house to the other, slow and purposeful. Step, step, step. Whatever was up there was taking its time, making sure I heard it, making sure I knew it was there. The steps went from the back of the house to the front, then stopped directly above my bedroom. Just stopped and stayed there. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling for what must have been 10 minutes before the footsteps resumed and moved away. I was losing my mind. There's no other way to put it. I wasn't sleeping more than an hour or two a night, and when I did sleep, I had nightmares, always the same dream. Something massive and dark standing outside my window, watching me. Sometimes it would tap on the glass. Sometimes it would just stare. I'd wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, convinced something was in the room with me. I'd lost 10 pounds, maybe more. I barely had an appetite. And when I did try to eat, food tasted like cardboard. My hands shook constantly. Not just when I was scared, but all the time. Pouring coffee in the morning, my hands would shake so bad I'd spill it. I couldn't focus on anything. I'd sit down to watch TV and realize an hour had passed and I hadn't processed a single thing I'd seen. My mind was always elsewhere, always on alert, always waiting for the next sound or sign that they were coming back. Every sound made me jump. A branch falling in the forest, a car door closing 2 miles away at my neighbor's place, my dog shifting position under the bed, my own footsteps on the floorboards. I was constantly on edge, operating on pure adrenaline and fear. I'd find myself standing at the window for hours, not even realizing I'd been there, just staring at the tree line, watching for movement, waiting for something to emerge from the shadows. This couldn't keep going. I knew that. Something had to give. Either they would make their move, or I would snap completely, or the protective Bigfoot would fail and they'd get past it. One way or another, the situation was building towards some kind of conclusion. I just didn't know what it would be or when it would happen. The uncertainty was almost worse than the fear. At least if I knew what was coming, I could prepare for it. But this constant state of waiting, of tension, of not knowing when the next attack would come or how bad it would be, was destroying me from the inside out. It was a Tuesday evening right around dusk when the protective Bigfoot made direct contact. I'd been sitting on my back porch with a baseball bat across my lap for about an hour, feeling helpless and exhausted and defeated. The sun was setting, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple and pink, the kind of beautiful sunset that would normally make me feel peaceful and grateful. But that night, I felt nothing but dread. I was just staring at the forest, waiting for the inevitable, knowing something bad was coming, but not knowing when or how. That's when it emerged from the tree line, the protective Bigfoot. I recognized it immediately by that patch of lighter fur on its shoulder, the marking that had become so familiar to me over the past 2 weeks. It moved slowly, deliberately, each step measured and careful. It kept its eyes locked on me the whole time, never looking away, never breaking that contact. I froze, gripping the baseball bat so hard my knuckles went white and my hands started to ache. My first instinct was to run inside and lock the door, but something made me stay. Maybe curiosity, maybe resignation, maybe some deep instinct telling me this was different, this wasn't a threat. The creature approached to within about 10 feet and stopped, maintaining that distance like it knew that was close enough without being threatening. We made eye contact, and I'll never forget what I saw in those eyes. They were intelligent in a way that shook me to my core. Not animal intelligence, the kind you see in a smart dog or a clever crow. This was something deeper. Those eyes held awareness, understanding, maybe even compassion. They were dark and expressive, and looking into them, I felt seen in a way I'd never experienced before. We stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds, just looking at each other, sizing each other up. The Bigfoot wasn't aggressive in its posture. It stood upright but relaxed, arms at its sides, head slightly tilted like it was studying me. I could see details I'd never noticed before. The texture of its fur, coarse and thick, the way its chest rose and fell with its breathing, the individual fingers on its massive hands, so much like human hands but bigger, stronger. This close, I could smell it too, that musky odor but less overwhelming than I'd expected, more like wet dog than anything else. Then the Bigfoot started making gestures with its massive hands. It pointed to the forest, then to me, then made a pushing motion away from itself. It repeated this several times, getting more urgent with each repetition. Then it pointed to my house, made a sweeping motion with both arms, and then a breaking gesture, snapping an imaginary stick in half. I understood. The message was clear. You need to leave. They will destroy this place. I tried to gesture back. I pointed to the house, then to myself, then shook my head. This is my home. I can't just leave. The Bigfoot became more agitated. It made sounds of frustration, these huffing grunts, and paced back and forth. It repeated the warning gestures more forcefully, pointing to the forest again and again. That's when I noticed the shadows move in between the trees. The aggressive Bigfoots were watching this whole interaction. The protective Bigfoot saw me notice them and immediately positioned itself between me and the forest one more time. It backed away slowly, never turning its back on the woods until it disappeared into the tree line. I sat there on my porch for another hour watching the sun go down before I finally went inside and locked every door and window. That night was the worst one yet. Multiple Bigfoots surrounded my house, hitting the walls so hard the whole structure shook. They were screaming, these horrible vocalizations that didn't sound like any animal I'd ever heard. I could hear the protective Bigfoot too, its calls sounding desperate now, clearly fighting. There was crashing and breaking branches outside, the sounds of a serious struggle happening in my yard. Something slammed against my back door so hard the frame cracked. Wood splintered and I heard the hinges groan. I barricaded myself in my bedroom, pushing the dresser against the door. My dog was shaking so bad I thought she might have a heart attack. I called my brother who lives 40 miles away, but I didn't tell him what was happening. I just said I needed to stay with him for a few days. He could tell something was wrong by my voice but didn't press. He said to come whenever I needed to. At first light, I threw essentials into my truck. My dog jumped into the passenger seat and wouldn't leave it. As I was pulling out of the driveway, I saw the protective Bigfoot standing at the tree line watching me go. The creature looked wounded. It was limping, favoring its left side, and there was matted fur on its shoulder that looked dark and wet. But it was still standing guard, still positioned between my house and the forest. I wanted to stop, wanted to do something, but what could I do? I drove away. I stayed with my brother for 4 days. The whole time, I couldn't stop thinking about what was happening to my property. My brother thought I was having some kind of breakdown. He kept suggesting I see a doctor, maybe talk to someone. I didn't blame him for not believing me. If someone had told me this story a month ago, I wouldn't have believed them either. But I knew what I saw. I knew it was real. I debated calling the police, but I knew they wouldn't believe me. What evidence did I have? Some holes in my yard and grainy video on my phone that didn't show much of anything. They'd think I was wasting their time or looking for attention. Part of me hoped that maybe the worst was over. Maybe the aggressive Bigfoots had moved on. Maybe the protective one had driven them off for good. I had to go back. I had to check on my house. I drove back on a sunny afternoon, hoping daylight would make it safer. The weather was beautiful, clear blue sky, temperature in the mid-70s. Everything seemed peaceful as I approached my property. Then I saw my driveway. It was littered with broken branches and torn vegetation like a storm had torn through. But there had been no storm. I got out of my truck slowly, my heart starting to pound again. I walked toward the house with a growing sense of dread. The backyard was completely destroyed. Every twig marker was gone. The large holes that had been dug were filled in, but new destruction was everywhere. Trees had been stripped of bark. Bushes were ripped out of the ground. And the smell hit me. This overwhelming musky odor that made my eyes water. It was the smell of something wild, something that didn't belong near human habitation. Then I saw the house itself, and my stomach dropped. My back door was torn completely off its hinges and lying in the yard like a discarded toy. Not just opened, not just broken, but completely removed from the structure. The door frame was splintered into pieces with chunks of wood scattered across the porch and yard. Windows were smashed, every single one I could see from this angle. Glass was everywhere, catching the afternoon sunlight and sparkling like diamonds across the ground. It would have been beautiful if it wasn't so horrifying. I stepped carefully through the doorway where my back door used to be, my boots crunching on broken glass with every step. The sound echoed in the unnatural silence. No birds singing, no insects buzzing, nothing. Just the crunch of glass under my feet and the pounding of my heart in my ears. I moved slowly, afraid of what I'd find, but unable to stop looking. The kitchen was completely ransacked. Cabinets were pulled off the walls, some of them ripped clean away with the mounting brackets still attached, others hanging by one corner. Their contents were scattered across the floor in a chaotic mess. Broken plates and bowls, dented cans, boxes of food torn open with their contents spilled everywhere. My refrigerator had been tipped over and was lying on its side, the door hanging open. Food had spilled out and was rotting in the afternoon heat. The table was flipped upside down with 2 of its legs snapped cleanly off. I'd built that table myself 5 years ago. Solid oak. It should have been nearly indestructible. In the living room, every piece of furniture was overturned or destroyed. My couch was shredded, the fabric torn into strips with the stuffing pulled out and strewn across the floor like strange snow. The coffee table was in splinters. My bookshelf had been pushed over, books scattered everywhere, many with their spines broken or pages torn. Deep claw marks gouged the walls and door frames, scratches that went through the paint and drywall and into the wood studs beneath. Some of the marks were so deep I could fit 3 fingers into them. The scratches weren't random either. They seemed almost deliberate, like someone had methodically destroyed every surface they could reach. My bedroom was somehow even worse than the rest. The mattress was ripped completely apart, not just torn, but systematically shredded into pieces. The stuffing was scattered like snow across the floor, piled in drifts against the walls. The bed frame itself was broken, the wooden slats snapped in half. The dresser I'd used to barricade the door during that last terrible night was tipped over, and all the drawers had been pulled out and smashed. My clothes were scattered everywhere, many of them torn. The bathroom mirror was shattered, and there were more of those deep scratch marks on every surface I could see. The walls, the door frame, even the ceiling in some places, they'd been thorough. But the absolute worst part, worse than any of the physical destruction, was the smell. That musky, wild animal smell was overwhelming inside the house, concentrated in the enclosed space until it was almost suffocating. It made my eyes water and my throat close up. I had to breathe through my mouth to keep from gagging. This wasn't just the smell of something wild passing through. This was the smell of territory marked, of ownership claimed. They'd made absolutely sure I would know what had happened here, that I would understand this space was theirs now and I was no longer welcome. I went back outside and walked through the backyard again, really looking this time. There were signs of serious conflict everywhere. Deep gouges in the earth where something heavy had been dragged. Large patches of dark hair caught on broken branches and fence posts. The trees around the perimeter had bark stripped away, and there were scratch marks high up on the trunks, 10 or 12 feet off the ground. One small tree, maybe 6 inches in diameter, was completely uprooted and lying across the yard. Then I found the blood trail. It started near my back porch, these dark stains on the wood that had dried to almost black. The trail led across the yard toward the forest. I followed it, my heart in my throat, watching where I stepped. The blood drops got bigger as I went, and there were more patches of that lighter-colored fur caught on bushes. After about 50 feet, I stopped. The trail kept going into the thick forest, but I couldn't make myself go any further. I stood there at the edge of the trees, looking into the shadows, but I couldn't do it. I turned back. Near the tree line, maybe 20 feet from where the forest began, I found one last twig arrangement. This one was different from all the others I'd seen. It was more elaborate, more carefully and deliberately constructed. Someone or something had spent real time and attention on this one. The twigs were woven together in an intricate pattern, forming a structure about 2 feet tall. It was placed directly in the path between my destroyed house and the dark forest, positioned where it would be impossible to miss if you were walking from one to the other. Next to the arrangement was a large stone, roughly the size and shape of a football, carefully positioned. And on top of the stone, placed with obvious intent, was a tuft of that distinctive lighter-colored fur. The fur from the protective Bigfoot's shoulder. I recognized it immediately. That patch of fur had become so familiar to me over the past 2 weeks, a way to identify the creature that had tried so hard to save me. And now here it was, left behind like a message or a memorial or a final goodbye. I stood there for a long time, maybe 15 minutes, just staring at that arrangement and that tuft of fur. My mind was racing, but also strangely blank. I understood what this meant. This was a final marker, a deliberate communication left specifically for me to find. Either it was a goodbye from the protective Bigfoot, a way of saying it had done all it could and now I was on my own. Or it was a memorial left by the creature itself before some final battle, or maybe left by another Bigfoot after the protective one had fallen. Either way, it meant the same thing. The protection was over. The fight was finished. I was truly alone now. I took out my phone with shaking hands and photographed the arrangement from multiple angles. This would be the only real evidence I'd have of any of this, the only proof that this incredible, terrible thing had actually happened. The only thing I could point to and say, "This is real, this happened, I'm not crazy." Then I carefully picked up the stone with the tuft of fur still attached to it and carried it back to my truck, cradling it in both hands like it was made of glass. It was all I had left of the creature that had tried to protect me. I stood in what was left of my home, trying to process everything. The insurance company wasn't going to cover this. How could I explain it? That Bigfoots had fought a war over my property and destroyed everything in the process? They'd think I was filing a fraudulent claim. The police would think vandals did it, or that I did it myself for the insurance money or attention. Nobody would believe the truth. I knew what had happened, though. There was a war over this land, over this territory. I was caught in the middle of something I didn't understand, something that had nothing to do with me but consumed me anyway. The protective Bigfoot had tried to save me, had warned me to leave, had fought to keep me safe, and it had paid a price for that, maybe the ultimate price. The aggressive Bigfoots had won, they'd claimed the territory and destroyed everything I had in the process. I spent the next few hours packing what was salvageable into my truck. There wasn't much. Most of my belongings were destroyed or contaminated by that overwhelming smell. I took the stone with the fur tuft and put it in a box in the cab of the truck. I took photos of the damage for the insurance company, knowing they probably wouldn't matter. Then I made the hardest decision of my life. I put the house up for sale as is, took a massive loss on it, selling it for barely more than the land was worth. The buyers were investors from out of state who never even visited the property in person. I didn't tell them what had happened, I just wanted it gone, wanted to be done with it. I moved to a city apartment, a small place on the 3rd floor with neighbors on all sides and streetlights right outside my window. My dog seemed relieved to be around people and traffic again. She started eating normally within a week. Sometimes late at night, I take up that stone with the tuft of fur still attached to it. I look at the photo I took of that final twig arrangement. I wonder what happened to the protective Bigfoot. Did it survive? I hope so, but deep down, I don't think it did. That blood trail was too extensive, and the creature had looked so wounded when I drove away. I wonder if those aggressive Bigfoots are still fighting over that patch of forest. I wonder if there are other creatures out there, other beings we don't understand, with their own territories and wars and rules that have nothing to do with human concerns. I realized something important through all of this. There are wars and territories and rules in those forests that humans don't understand and were never meant to understand. I was accidentally caught in the middle of something ancient, something that had been going on long before I bought that property and will continue long after. One Bigfoot tried to save me. It repeatedly put itself in danger, fought against its own kind, warned me to leave, and I didn't listen soon enough. I feel guilty about that. Guilty for not understanding the warning sooner. Guilty for not leaving when the protective Bigfoot first tried to tell me. Guilty for whatever happened to that creature after I drove away. It gave everything to try to protect me, and I can't even confirm if it survived. The property belongs to the Bigfoots now. It always did, really. We just built our houses on their land and pretended it was ours. I'll never go back there. I can't. But I also know I'll never forget. Sometimes I look out my apartment window at the city lights, at the concrete and the cars and the people, and I think about dark forests and twig markers and intelligent eyes in the moonlight. I think about that protective Bigfoot standing at the tree line, wounded and limping, but still standing guard as I drove away. I hope it found peace. I hope it survived somehow. But the rational part of me knows the truth. The price of protection was paid in that forest, a price paid in blood and sacrificed by a creature that owed me nothing but tried to save me anyway. I'll never know for certain what happened after I left. I'll never know if the protective Bigfoot made it out alive or if it died defending territory that wasn't even its own just to give a human time to escape. That's the part that keeps me up at night. My brother still thinks I had some kind of breakdown. The insurance company denied my claim. The police closed the case as vandalism with no suspects. The new owners of the property haven't reported any problems, but then again, would they admit it if they had? Would anyone believe them? I barely believe it myself sometimes, and I was there. I lived it. But I have the stone, I have the fur, I have the photos on my phone, and the memories burned into my brain. I know what I saw, I know what happened, and I know that there's something out there in those Montana woods, something intelligent and powerful and completely beyond our understanding. Something that can choose to protect or destroy, that has its own society and rules and territories. Something that we've shared this world with for longer than we can imagine, even though we barely acknowledge its existence. If you're reading this and thinking about moving to a remote property surrounded by forest, think carefully. Think about what might already be there, what might consider that land theirs. Think about what you'll do if you find yourself caught in the middle of something you can't control or fully understand. And if you start finding strange twig arrangements around your property, if you hear digging in the middle of the night, if you see massive footprints in your yard, don't ignore the warnings. Don't do what I did. Leave. Just leave. Take your things and go before it's too late. Because once these things escalate, once you're caught in the middle of their conflicts, there's no good way out. You can't negotiate with them. You can't call the authorities. You can't fight them. All you can do is run and hope they let you go. I got lucky. The protective Bigfoot gave me time to escape. It sacrificed itself so I could drive away. Not everyone would be that fortunate. Not everyone would have a guardian standing between them and the aggressive ones. Most people would just wake up one morning to find their house destroyed and never know why. Or worse, they wouldn't wake up at all. So that's my story. That's what happened in Montana 3 weeks ago. That's why I'm living in this cramped apartment with my traumatized dog, looking out at city lights instead of stars, hearing sirens instead of forest sounds. It's why I keep a stone with a tuft of fur in a box in my closet, and why I sometimes take it out and wonder about the creature that tried to save me. People can believe me or not. It doesn't really matter. I know the truth. I know what's out there. And I know I'll never be able to look at a forest the same way again. Every shadow could be something watching. Every sound could be a warning. Every moment of peace could be the calm before something terrible. That property in Montana is someone else's problem now. Maybe the Bigfoots will leave them alone. Maybe the new owners will never see anything strange. Or maybe one night they'll wake up to the sound of digging and the whole cycle will start over again. I hope not. I wouldn't wish this experience on anyone. But if they do encounter something, I hope they're smarter than I was. I hope they recognize the warnings for what they are. I hope they leave before it's too late. And I hope they never have to stand in the ruins of their home, wondering if the creature that tried to protect them survived, knowing they'll never have an answer. That's the worst part of all of this. Not the destroyed house, not the financial loss, not even the fear and trauma. The worst part is not knowing if that brave, protective Bigfoot made it out alive, not knowing if it died alone in the forest, wounded and defeated because it tried to save someone who didn't even belong there. That thought haunts me more than anything else. Sometimes I think about going back, just driving out there and walking into the forest, looking for signs, trying to find out what happened. But I know I won't. I can't. That territory belongs to the Bigfoots now, and I'm not welcome there anymore. If I went back, I'd be intruding again, putting myself at risk again, potentially starting the whole conflict over. The protective Bigfoot gave me a chance to escape. I owe it to that creature to stay away. So I sit in my apartment and I remember the sound of digging in the middle of the night. I remember the sight of that massive figure hunched over in my garden. I remember the twig markers carefully placed around my property. I remember the confrontations, the vocalizations, the desperate fights. I remember intelligent eyes looking at me, trying to communicate, trying to warn me. I remember driving away and seeing that wounded creature still standing guard. And I remember that final twig arrangement, more elaborate than all the others, placed deliberately where I couldn't miss it. A goodbye, a memorial, a final message from something that tried to save me even though it had no reason to. That image is burned into my mind. I'll carry it with me for the rest of my life. The world is bigger and stranger than most people realize. There are things out there in the wilderness that we don't understand, that we're not meant to understand. Ancient beings with their own lives and conflicts and territories. We build our houses on their land and act surprised when they push back. We clear their forests and wonder why they react. We stumble into their wars and call it a mystery when we get hurt. I witnessed something that most people will never see. I was part of something ancient and primal, caught in a conflict that had nothing to do with me but everything to do with the land I thought I owned. And one of those beings, for reasons I'll never fully understand, chose to protect me, chose to put itself between me and danger, chose to warn me even though I couldn't fully understand the warnings, chose to give me time to escape even though it meant fighting its own kind. That means something. That has to mean something. These creatures aren't mindless animals. They're intelligent. They have social structures, territories, rules. They can recognize individuals and make choices about how to treat them. The protective Bigfoot chose to help me. The aggressive ones chose violence. These were conscious decisions made by thinking beings. And we have no idea they exist. Most people think Bigfoot is a joke, a myth, something to laugh about. But I know better now. I've seen them, I've watched them fight, I've seen their intelligence and their capacity for both violence and protection. They're real, and they're out there, and most of us are completely unaware of the world that exists right alongside our own. Maybe that's for the best. Maybe humans and Bigfoots aren't meant to coexist in close proximity. Maybe the boundaries between our worlds are meant to stay firm, with each side keeping to their own territory. My mistake was building a house on land that was never really mine, living in a place where I didn't belong. The Bigfoots were there first. They'll be there long after the house crumbles and the forest reclaims the land. I think about the protective Bigfoot every day. I wonder if it survived. I wonder if it's still out there somewhere in those Montana woods, or if it died in that conflict. I wonder if other Bigfoots remember what it did, if its sacrifice meant anything to them. I wonder if creatures like that have concepts of honor or remembrance, if the protective Bigfoot's actions were recognized by its own kind. These are questions I'll never have answers to. I'll never know what happened after I drove away. I'll never know the full story of why that Bigfoot chose to protect me, or what the conflict was really about, or how it ended. All I have are fragments, pieces of something bigger that I witnessed but didn't fully understand. And that tuft of fur on a stone, a reminder that something extraordinary happened, even if I can't prove it to anyone else. 3 weeks have passed since I left that property. 3 weeks of living in this apartment, adjusting to city life, trying to process everything that happened. My dog is doing better. She's not as scared anymore, though she still won't go near wooded areas. I'm doing worse. I can't sleep without seeing those intelligent eyes in my mind. I can't hear unexpected sounds without tensing up, waiting for something to attack. I can't look at forests without wondering what's watching from the shadows. The trauma is real and lasting. I'm probably going to need therapy, though I don't know how I'd explain any of this to a therapist without sounding insane. The financial impact is real too. I lost most of my savings on that house, took a huge loss on the sale, and now I'm paying rent that's higher than my old mortgage was. But I'm alive, I'm safe, and that's because a Bigfoot I never really understood chose to give me that chance. So here I am, sitting in a city apartment, looking out at concrete and lights, holding a stone with a tuft of fur attached to it. Here I am, trying to make sense of something that defies sense. Here I am, knowing a truth that almost nobody would believe, carrying a memory that will never leave me. Here I am, alive because something that didn't have to care about me chose to anyway. And somewhere out there in the Montana wilderness, in those dark forests where ancient beings wage their wars, there might be a Bigfoot with lighter fur on its shoulder, still standing guard over territory that humans will never understand. Or there might be a final resting place where a brave creature fell defending someone who didn't belong. I'll never know which. But I'll always remember, that property belongs to them now. It always did. And I hope whoever owns it next is smarter than I was. I hope they listen to the warnings. I hope they leave before it's too late. Because out there in those woods, there are things we don't understand, conflicts we can't control, and beings that can choose to save us or destroy us on a whim. And most of the time, we won't even see them coming until it's too late. For more interesting stories, check this out.